Den ersten Referierenden jetzt
The
vor
first
Mittagessen darf
speaker
ich jetzt ganz herzlich begrüßen, den Professor
before
Markus
lunch will be
Röhl von der
Professor
Hochschule
Markus
für
Röhl
Wirtschaft
from
und
the
Umwelt in
University for
Nürtingen-Geislingen.
Economy and
Und er ist Professor für
in
Naturschutz und
Nürtingen-Geislingen. He's
Vegetationskunde und
Professor for
er wird
Nature
uns jetzt ein
Conservation and
Ergebnis von
Vegetation
einem
Science, and he will share with us
FNG-Projekt vorstellen, wo
a
es darum geht,
result of an
quasi
research
Möglichkeiten und
and
Grenzen
development
des
project.
herrenschießenden
It
Deichs
is
und
about
Streithähnen in der
the
Praxis vorzustellen. Herr
investigation
Röhl,
of
recht
the
herzlich
possibilities
willkommen
and
und wir
limits
freuen uns auf
of
Ihren Vortrag.
livestock
Wunderbar,
protection
vielen
on
Dank für die
dikes
Einleitung
and
und tatsächlich
steep
machen wir genau
slopes
da
in
weiter, wo wir
practice.
vor der Pause aufgehört haben.
Yes,
Ich
exactly.
weite
We
nur
are
jetzt den Blick,
continuing with
indem
where
ich
we were
andere
before the break. I just kind
Sonderstandorte,
of
die
now
eben auch für
look
die
at
Beweidung eine sehr große
other
Rolle spielen.
special
Also, ich
sites that are
möchte, wie schon
important for
angekündigt,
grazing.
das FNE-Projekt
So I
Herdenschutz
would
am
like
Deich und
to
Streithähnen in der Praxis
share with
vorstellen.
you
Ich darf Ihnen erst
the
einmal
project
Projektziel und
of
Projektinhalte
livestock protection on
darstellen,
dike
damit
and
Sie sich auch
steep
einordnen können, was wir dort
slopes.
gemacht
First of all, I
haben,
would
in
like
welchen
to show
Stadien
to
wir
you
das durchführen
the
und die aktuelle
project
Ausgangslage
goal
uns
and
mal
project
anschauen.
content,
Natürlich
then we
auch
will
die
look at the
Einstellungen,
starting
sowohl was die
situation, we will
Schärfe
look
als
at
auch die
the
Planbarkeit.
problems both
Dann
for
werden wir
dikes
Ihnen
and for
quasi
steep
erläutern, warum
slopes.
wir alles aufgesucht haben, was
And then I would
unsere
like to
Datengrundlage
explain to
ist.
you
Und
who
dann von unserer
we
Informationsseite das
visited,
Eingemachte,
and in the
nämlich
fourth part, then
Möglichkeiten,
we will talk
Hammerwurf und
about
Grenzen
other
bisher
possibilities
Protections auf Sonderstandorten.
and also the limits of livestock protection
Das
in
ganze
special sites.
Projekt ist im Wesentlichen darauf zurückzuführen, dass es eine Anfrage im Deutschen Bundestag gab,
So there
die
has been a
gesagt hat,
question in the
dass wir
German
liebe Ämter, liebe
channel.
Bundesämter, erklärt uns doch mal, wie wir den
There
Weiterbeschutz
has
an
been
sicheren
a
Standorten wie
question
Deichen und
and
Steinböden möglich machen. Das ist der eigentliche Auftrag,
by
den
the
wir haben.
ministry, and
Wir
they
haben als Auftrag
wanted us to
bekommen vom
find out what
Bundesamt für
the
Landwirtschaft
actual
jeweils
situation is
15
on
Betriebe
dikes
aufzunehmen.
and
Also wir haben über 30
steep
Betriebe uns
slopes. So we
angeschaut,
looked at
die sozusagen
30
Best Practice
enterprises
Beispiele für
that
Herbeschutzmaßnahmen sind. Dieser Begriff
looked
Best Practice
at
Beispiele kommt aus der Aussage,
and we
unsere Betriebe haben
tried to
immer
find
gesagt,
best
wir sind
practices
eigentlich
there.
keine Best
Our
Practice
farms said that we
Beispiele.
are not best
Der Begriff
practice
ist ein bisschen
examples.
irreführend auch,
It is a little bit
weil es
misleading,
tatsächlich
this
sind alles
expression,
Betriebe, die sich auf den
because
Weg
these
gemacht
are
haben,
all
Herdenschutz auf diesen Sonderstandorten zu
farms
machen und auch
that
vieles gut machen,
did
aber auch tatsächlich an
livestock
allen Betrieben
protection projects
bestimmte
in
Grenzen
these
aufgezeigt haben. Und das
locations,
war auch letztendlich Ziel und
and they did the
Gegenstand
best
von
they
dem,
could,
was wir machen,
and
nämlich
that
einmal
also
zu
showed
schauen,
us up some
was ganz
limits.
unterschiedliche Lösungsansätze gibt es,
Basically, this allowed us to
technischer
see
Art,
what different approaches there are,
Systemmaßnahmen und so weiter und so fort.
technical
Und vor allen Dingen,
or
wie die
system-related
betrieblichen
measures,
Abläufe im
and
Wesentlichen integriert werden und auch welche
how
finanziellen
we also
Auswirkungen gibt es. Und wenn man jetzt
investigated how they
tatsächlich
can be
schließlich
integrated into
nahtlos an
the
das
operations.
anknüpft, was wir
So
gerade
in
eben
fact,
durchgesprochen haben,
I
nämlich eben
connect
nicht mit
to
dem
what we
Fokus auf
talked about
kleinen
beforehand,
Grünflächen, sondern mit
except
dem
that I
Fokus
don't
auf die schon
focus on
multifunktionellen
alpine
und
pastures, but
entsprechend
on the
die Deiche.
mid-high mountains and
Wer
also
sind
on
wir? Wenn
dikes.
ich die ganze Zeit
So
von
who are
wir rede,
we?
wir waren auch tatsächlich ein sehr, sehr großes
Well,
Team.
we were
Viele
in
von
fact a
denen,
very
die
large team. Many of those
quasi hier jetzt dran stehen, sind auch heute mit in der Tagung dabei.
who
Wir haben die Stellungnahme
are
zusammen mit
on
Herrn
this
Tegea gemacht. Der
slide
Andreas
also
Schiess ist, glaube
attend
ich, auch
this
im Panel
conference.
mit dabei.
Andres
Er war
Schiss,
einer
for
unserer Partner.
instance, was one of our
Zum
partners.
Beispiel
He's on the
und
panel
die
as well.
Deiche haben wir im Wesentlichen im
And
Artenschutz Niedersachsen mit dem Kollegen Peter
dikes
Schutt
were
und
done
Herrn
with
Leube gemacht und
Mr.
mit dem
Peter
Sven
Schutt
Keller, der, glaube
from
ich, heute
Lower
Nachmittag
Saxony,
auch
and Mr.
das
Keller.
gleiche
I
Seminar
think Mr.
moderiert.
Keller
Also
will
vielleicht sehen
talk
Sie mal, dass wir
about
ganz gut
guard
eingebunden
dogs in the
sind an dieser
afternoon as
Stelle
well. So you can see that we as a
unsere
university are
Community.
really
Selber
quite
für die, die uns
well
nicht kennen, wir kommen
integrated
aus
into the
dem
community.
westlich
So
angrenzenden
as I've
Bereich in
said,
Bayern
we
nennt sich
come
Bavaria.
from the
So,
western
jetzt mal
border
kurz
area of
2 Folie zur
Bavaria,
Ausgangslage. Eigentlich ist
and
wahrscheinlich ein bisschen
our
überflogen.
university is the
Ich nehme an, dass
University
Sie
for
sowieso in
Economy
den
and
letzten
the
Wochen und
Environment.
Tagen hier mitbekommen haben. Wir haben natürlich große
So
Anhangflächen, bedeutet in den
if
Alpen, aber
we
eben auch in den
think of
Mittelgebirgen und
steep
auch in größeren Flusstälern, die eben vielleicht
areas or
landläufig gar nicht
steep
auf kleinen
slopes,
Anhangflächen denken.
then we
Wir haben bei den
have them
Steithähnen
in the
natürlich einen sehr, sehr
Alps,
hohen Anteil
certainly, but also
naturschutzfachlich
perhaps near
bedeutender Fläche.
rivers.
Deswegen auch der
So
Blick
we
von
have
hier.
a
Denken Sie daran,
high
dass wir
share
Gelder nicht
of
für den
very
Hof ausgeben,
important
sondern wir geben es für Geld
areas
aus
from
und die echte
the
Tierhaltung in diesen Gebieten
aspect
ist
of
sehr,
nature
sehr großer
conservation,
Anteil
and
erhalten. Also das ist in der Kommunikation,
they are
denke ich,
quite
nochmal
important
wichtig,
there.
das zu sagen. Die Tagung steht
And
ja
it
unter
is
dem
important to
Stichwort Rinder
communicate
und
that
Pferde.
landscape
Deswegen
conservation is also
habe
very
ich ein bisschen
important.
den Vortrag
So
heute auf die Rinder
I
konzentriert, wobei wir sehr viele
concentrated my
Ausgangsaspekte
presentation
auch haben.
on
Ich werde
cattle,
später nochmal darauf eingehen. Wir haben bei den
but a lot of
Steillagen in
what
Deutschland
I
eben
say
einen sehr
also
hohen Anteil
applies
von
to
Rinder- und
small
Weideflächen.
livestock.
Und dann haben wir uns die Frage gestellt, wie relevant ist das Thema
The question that
eigentlich
we
in
asked
unseren
ourselves, how
Gewerbegebiet?
relevant
Wie
is
viele
this
Steinlandflächen beteiligt daran
subject
in
of
Deutschland und Bundesländern?
grazing
Wir
on
haben
the
da
steep
schon ein bisschen
mountains? How many of them do we
verglichen
have in
bei der
Germany?
Anfrage in vielen
But
Bundesländern.
when
Da
we
war die
asked
Antwort,
in
ja, das
many
wüssten wir selber auch nicht.
länder,
Oder
they
müssten wir mal
the answer
nachgucken,
was, well, we would
wie
like to
Steinland in Ländern,
know
ja, also landwirtschaftliche
whether we
Durchlaufstellen kennen wir
actually
aus,
do
aber das
have
auf dem
steep
Bereich, wo man sieht, ist nicht
slopes
so einfach.
and
Aber das ist mal relativ
how
einfach,
many of
immer
them are
anzuführen,
forest
die
covered and how
Relevanz ist. Wir haben
many are
einfach
grazed. So
Satellitendaten, die
we
grünen
just took
Landcover-Daten
satellite
mit
data,
Anordnungskarten verschnitten und haben dann
land cover
geschaut,
data,
was ist
and
denn ungefähr der
we
Flächenanteil
then
von dem,
combined
was
them,
tatsächlich an Grünland in
and we tried to find
Ländern
out
ist. Und da
how
kommt
many
das sehr, sehr
pastures we have
prozentual
on
gewaltig
steep
sein. Und da kommen wir auf
slopes.
die ganz gute Zahl von so ungefähr 300.000 Hektar, wo wir in Deutschland
The surface area that
um
we
das Ganze mal
established was
nochmal in
approximately
Relation zu setzen zum Wolf, zwei
300,000
Extreme gegenüberstellen.
hectares.
Haben
Here,
wir hier die
I want to bring in the wolf.
Flächen, was
Here,
da
the
in den Grünen
green
drin ist. Der
areas.
ist in dem Zusammenhang nicht so interessant. Das kommt aus diesen Landcover-Daten. Aber das ist ungefähr die
Well, the green
Größe,
areas
die wir verschnitten haben.
is
Und das sieht man, das
approximately
ist
the
eben nicht nur die
framework
Almflächen
that we
und
looked at, and
die
it's not
Alpenflächen,
really
die da
only alpine pastures.
im Alpenraum geht, sondern das zieht sich
It's
über
not
das
even only about
Harz
the
und
Alps, but it
Erzgebirge und
all
so weiter und so fort.
it
Und
goes
dann
all the
kann man
way up to
feststellen,
the
das
Harz
letzte
Mountains.
Monitoring-Jahr von Wolfsvorkommen, eben Karte, die Sie wahrscheinlich alle kennen. Und ich sage dann
And
immer, man hat ein bisschen das
this
Gefühl, dass die
map
Wölfe nicht
you
komplett
might know,
auslaufen, weil wir wirklich so
perhaps
eine Art Blaupause haben.
we
Die
have some
Besiedlung
kind of
konzentriert sich eben, oder die
thinking
flächige Besiedlung
that
konzentriert sich
the wolves
tatsächlich
don't
eben
like to
gerade in den
walk
Flächen nördlich
uphill that
der Elbe
much.
und rund
And in
um die
fact,
Elbe.
the
Und
concentrations
wir
really are
haben
around the river
lediglich,
Elbe
weil eben
in a
eine
medium
Besiedlungsphase erwartet wird,
high
die bis
areas.
2025
The
dauert.
settlement is
Das
yet
ist das
to
eine.
happen, the settlement of wolves.
Auch das nochmal ganz schnell zur Wiederholung. Warum haben wir
And
überhaupt
also
in
this
nördlich so eine
for
Steillagen und ein
repetition,
Problem?
quickly,
Wir
why
haben
do we
halt,
have
und die
problems
Regierung stellt
with
für Artenschutzmaßnahmen ein grundsätzliches natürlich Problem dar.
livestock
Wir haben
protection in on
aufgrund
steep
der Steilheit des
slopes?
Reliefs in der
Because
Regel
of
einen
the
sehr geringen
steepness of the
Anteil,
relief,
was zum
we
Beispiel
usually
Zaunbauaktivitäten
have
erschwert.
a
Wir haben dadurch, dass
soil that
wir
is not very deep, that makes it
Steinanlagen
very
haben,
difficult to
entsprechende
install
Sichtachsen in
fences.
einer
Also, we have
hochreliefierten Landschaft
vision
gleichzeitig eine ganz
axes
stark, eine sehr
and
hohe Eignung für die Erholungsnutzung, Wander, Fahrradfahren
these
und so weiter und
axes are
so
very
fort. Das
much
heißt, wir haben
liked
systemimmanent eben nicht nur in den Alpen, sondern auch
for
in den
or by
Mittelgebirgsländern
tourists. So in
systeme
mid-high
Erholungsnutzung durch
mountains,
Bodenmodulation,
we have a lot of
entlang
tourists who
von
seek
den Steillagen gehen, auch
for
klassische Landqueren.
relaxation
Das
and
Gleiche haben wir eben auch mit Fließgewässern,
follow
die
leisure
in der Regel
pursuits.
tatsächlich unsere Koppeln queren, was dann dazu führt, dass wir im
Then
gesamten reliefierten Gelände eben sehr, sehr
we
hohe
also looked
Problematiken, was Überspülhilfen
at
von außen angeht, aber auch was
other areas
Versorgungsmöglichkeiten angeht. Also sprich,
such
die
as
ganze
rivers and
Herkunft hier ist
ditches
im
and
Wesentlichen
so on,
gleich.
and
Jetzt gucken wir uns das mal
refuges.
für die Deiche an. Das ist vielleicht was
Now
Neues für
let's look
viele
at
von
it for
Ihnen,
dikes.
die
This
sich
might
mit
be new for
Herdenschutz
you.
auseinandersetzen. Auch da haben wir eben
Here
haben wir uns angeschaut, wie ist denn
we looked
tatsächlich die
at the
Relevanz des
actual
Themas. Und die ist
relevance of
tatsächlich
the
deutlich höher, wie wir
subject, and it is
vielleicht in
much
Süddeutschland
higher
wahrnehmen. Also zum einen haben wir jetzt
than
im
we
Sonderstandort
realize in
Ausgleichung
southern
auf die
Germany.
entsprechenden
So on
Vor- und Hinterländer
dikes
oder
and
Extremland sind den
the
Deichen entsprechend
land in front of
einige
it and
Deiche
the
geöffnet.
alluvial
Die Beweidung auf den Deichen
land,
dient, und das ist wichtig nochmal zum Verständnis,
we
vor allen Dingen
have
dem
these
Hochwasserschutz.
special
Das heißt, ich habe bei
sites,
einer
and grazing here
Ansiedlung,
serves
Anbeweidung
flood
im
protection.
Wesentlichen
So
Rivers
this
oder
is a
Steillagen
different
die zum
requirement
Beispiel
than
neben der
to
Landwirtschaft
the
auch hohe
steep
Naturschutzbedeutung
slopes.
haben. Die gibt es in den Vorländern an den Deichen entsprechend auch. Wir haben natürlich traditionell auch bei den Deichen einen sehr geringen
Traditionally,
Anteil von
in the
Rinderbewirtung,
dikes,
deswegen werde ich das
we
Deichthema ein bisschen
have a
weiter
low
absenken.
share of
Aber um die
cattle
Größenordnung sich klar zu machen,
grazing.
es geht
But
so wir
to
haben ja auch
illustrate
angefragt,
what
wie
we
viele
are
Deiche
talking
haben wir
about,
denn?
we
Und
asked
dann
how
haben wir
many dikes we
interessante
have,
Antworten von einzelnen
and
Bundesländern
we
bekommen,
received
wo wir
interesting
wahrscheinlich nicht den
answers
richtigen
from
Vertreter
various
haben, der
lender,
weiß, wo überall Deiche sind.
where we
Aber wir
probably
gehen
didn't ask
in
the
der
right
Recherche davon aus,
person.
dass wir
But
so wahrscheinlich um die
according to our
15.000 Kilometer
research,
Deichslänge
we
in Deutschland
think that
haben.
we probably have
Natürlich, das meiste sind
15,000 kilometers in
Binnendeiche. Wir
dike
haben dann auch
length. A
gleichzeitig
lot of them are
eine Frage
inland
gestellt, wie viele Tierhalter
dikes.
haben wir denn
And
auf
then we
ihren
also
Deichen?
asked
Und
how
das führt
many
dann,
animal keepers
was
do
man
we have
davon
on these
zuletzt vor
dikes.
Kopf gestoßen sagen
And
kann.
the
Die
water
Meldung war, dass es
kind of
etliche Tiere
authorities
sind, aber
didn't
es sind
know
noch
that
keine
at all.
500
They
mehr.
said that it's
Und anhand
possibly
von 2
somewhat more
Influssbereichen
than
haben wir dann
500.
gerechnet, gehen wir
And if you also kind of integrate coastal dikes, then we have perhaps 20% of the sheep population in Germany that might have been stood on a dike at one stage in their life. So that's approximately 250,000 to 300,000 sheep. Here we have the comparison again of the two maps. On the left-hand side, you can see the dikes that we researched. You can see that in northern Germany, some of them are still missing. But as far as the south is concerned, the dikes are well mapped.
Höhere Überschneidung haben, was vor allen Dingen entsprechend die
And we have quite a lot of overlap on the Elbe with its side branches.
Genau. Was ist das Problem bei den Deichen?
So what's the problem of the dikes?
Dass wir die Sicherstellung der Funktionalität als
we obviously have as a top priority that we need to ensure the functionality of the dikes. And here, one of the big questions is whether the guard dogs dig, because we mustn't make holes into the dikes. Also, at flood, the fences might be flooded by water. This is a photograph from Lower Saxony. Most of the dikes are long, narrow pastures, but this one is much more wider. So we have a lot of use of these dikes for leisure pursuits also. And there are often tourists that cycle in these areas. Here we have flowing water, ditches and channels, etc. And near the dikes, we have dike units or dike associations that have completely different requirements. If you have one thing, one rule in one land, then you can have a completely different one in another one. Let us look at the various farms that we looked at. These are the ones from the steep slopes. We have looked at 12 farms from 6 lands. Some were from Bavaria, and we agreed that we wouldn't kind of call them by name, because exposing a company is often not desired. So there were also 2 farms from Switzerland. What did they do in the steep slopes? They did very different measures. They used nets and semi-mobile fences and also fixed fences. They had guard dogs and llamas in the portfolio, also herding and also fence monitoring systems. As far as the dikes were concerned, we had 2 from Bavaria, one from Rheinland-Pfalz, and one from North Rhine-Westphalia. And also there were 2 coastal areas. They do similar things as in the steep slopes. Here we have, for example, various fences. We looked at semi-mobile fences and fixed fences, for example. So what did the companies say, or what did the farms say to us? What we found out in information comes from them. So I am not wearing my university hat, my academic hat, but the possibilities that were reported were by the practitioners in the field, and that informed us about the possibilities and about the limits. So please do take into account here that this is practical information. I represent these people. So technical measures. We won't go into the various fence types. We find that in the reports. There are specific conferences about that as well, but there's a couple of aspects that are worth highlighting. When fixed and permanent fences are made, usually you have to think about where my fence route is, because here we have a considerable cost factor because I have to cut them out. The farms all said that the fences that we build later have to be very well thought out. So as to eliminate or to sink possibilities of jumping up over the fence at the time of locating the fence. Then we had several farms, and upon consultation, they flattened their fence routes. So where the fence was to be in the future, they leveled the ground so that they wouldn't have as many problems when they installed the fence. They did it really well because it's always an intervention in the soil and the land, but they cooperated with the authorities, and the authorities then ultimately allowed them to do these interventions. So if you have something like that in the upper reaches of the Black Forest with historical fencing, well, if you build a new fence, you should really think about the route, about its exact location and the routing. This seems to be trivial, but this is very important in order to keep the consequential costs, secondary costs low. This is a fence route that was or that is prepared together with the National Park management. It was a nice synergy here. Nature Conservation Administration actually helps its livestock keepers in order to afterwards ensure that there's effective grazing. And then we have the subject of fencing. We have the problem of earthing. In the case of dykes, this was necessary. And if there are long grazing phases, then we certainly have to introduce earthing or grounding. Grounding rods can be put into mineral mixtures that then have better water retention. So you can also get a handle on crossing water, and an example from Switzerland. In areas where we don't have sedentary wolves, we have an app that is semi-controlled by the state, and they alert the people of a migratory wolf, and they then say that the livestock protection in certain areas should be improved. This was an example from Switzerland. We said that this can really be translated into mid-mountains because we don't have permanent wolves there. So for a transitional period, this can be a possibility to optimize livestock protection areas, because this is ultimately an optimization task. This is a flat gate controller with a frequency limiter. If there is a flood here, then it will be electrified, and if water goes through and it reaches the lowest chains, then it is switched off. But the total system still has electricity without causing short circuits. Then we have these strands. These strands are also very important if there's a watercourse that flows in or through this area. Where we see much better potential are system measures. So in the morning, I put something in. I sneaked something in because I thought that I focused too much on cattle. So I thought I'd introduce herding as well. We talked about that just before. And in fact, in mid-mountains and other dikes, we have herded systems that make a lot of sense and that also make livestock protection on the land possible. If wolf protection is too expensive, then sometimes it can be possible to think of herders. In some farms, they've had mixed areas. They said that it is not possible to do a wolf protection fence around all of this area. So here, at least temporarily, I use shepherds. And interestingly, this happened both in dike and in steep slope locations. We have the problem,
Der Kollege aus Bayern hat ja gesagt, dass
the
tatsächlich
colleague from Bavaria said
als Grundschutz drin ist. Wir haben das
that
recherchiert. Wir wissen in der
herding is in as a basic protection measure in 6 Länder. It is basically integrated into basic protection, but not in all Länder. So here we need to appeal to the politicians to at least establish basic protection. And our vet said quite clearly that herding is eligible for funds, namely personnel. If I look to France or to Austria, then you have it there, and that is something that also our animal keepers asked for. Just a little thing about what we talked about before the break. Maybe it doesn't make sense to ask agriculture that much because our herding systems are often overlooked. They're not that prominent, but we still have them, especially off the Alps. Other thing that we talked about and that some enterprises have done, some farms have done, we have service providers. They have to be there to provide support with fences.
Was wir auch relativ häufig haben,
and what we also have relatively often
bei Maschinenanschaffungen, bei Hardware auch
is
Kooperationen zwischen den Tierhaltern
that cooperation between the animal keepers can be very suitable if it is about investing into machinery. Cooperation can then bring down the price if they share certain machines. This cooperation should certainly be intensified. Introduction of voluntaries, well, we had some companies that made a very good experience here, but you need good instruction. This is a photograph about surfaces that have a topographic quality that really can't be, well, they don't allow an overview. And with a herder, these surfaces can nevertheless be looked at or can be grazed quite well. So livestock protection measures are very suitable here. This is logical. We don't just have that in the Alps, we also have that in the middle mountains. And paddocks always have to be outside the paddock. Let us come to the end, and this is almost the end of my presentation. I left out the llamas here. Let's just go to the dogs. This also has a connection to what we heard in the morning. Generally speaking, the animal keepers said to us that you have to do a cost-benefit analysis before you buy guard dogs. The operations always have to be adjusted if you use these animals for livestock protection. We know that they provide effective measures of livestock protection. We also know that they also have to be combined with special measures on the measures. A general recommendation is difficult because only skilled people should actually work with guard dogs. What is very important here is if we have paddock keeping, the plots need to be small and they need to be fenced in. Overviewability, so the general ability to view the territory as a whole is very important. That is not so easy in the alpine pastures, as we all know. And now, as far as our farms are concerned, let's have a look at the funds. Our farms, not us, but our farms said that financing at 100% doesn't make sense. The farms themselves said that, because why did they say that? First of all, they said this fund leads to kind of half rising breeder prices. There are certain areas in northeast Germany where you cannot get the breeders for less than 6,000 to 7,000 euros. At the same time, 100% subsidy also has as a result that you don't look at the quality of the dogs that well, because it's paid for anyway. And what's also important is that the animal keeper said to us that you should go away from funding purchase, but what should be financed is maintenance. Some Länder already do that. It is also something where we want to communicate to the politicians. We do that in this project also, and we appeal to them that they should rethink their funding practices. In some cases, it is considered to fund not only the maintenance of the active guard dogs, but also of the retired guard dogs. This would be a great help for the farms that buy guard dogs now. And there are also KTBL figures, and we have ongoing costs of approximately 2,000 euros per year. The livestock protection dogs are financed when they are on the alpine pastures, but they eat all year round. Well, I've only got 2 more slides. Just to say this about the dogs, 80% of the dogs were not financed for various reasons. The farms wanted to work with guard dogs, but there was a problem financing, and also with the race. Often they chose the race that was not eligible for funding. There were also dogs that didn't receive funding because the farm wasn't located in a funding framework. And the whole thing really takes 2 years to integrate dogs into a herd. So a funding framework makes a little sense in many länder. So this is the slide for politics, not for you really, because it must be said that livestock protection is possible in special sites and locations, but always involves higher expenses. Also, grazing on dikes is an important aspect of flood protection. So we're not just talking about nature conservation, we are also talking about the protection of the landscape. We're also about ensuring an important service that is provided in these areas. Then abandoning grazing is not an option and mustn't be an option. And well, livestock protection is something that needs to be looked at from many different angles, from the angle, for instance, of flood protection, of land, of agriculture and nature conservation. And this takes me to the end with 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. Wonderful, Mr. Röhl. Thank you very much for this great overview of the practice of livestock protection in difficult areas. There were good suggestions for our project that I have heard. We should look at your results more in greater detail. So thank you very much. So we can allow just a few questions. We have a suggestion here or a question. Cost development for funding and ongoing maintenance of guard dogs, but that also applies to the fences. We have cost increases by more than 15%, and these increases are not to be neglected, especially also when we talk about repair. Yes, I left it out, but this is what the farms say. Many would want to abandon investment costs and instead introduce maintenance costs. We have looked at farms that had good basic financing, and nevertheless they cannot pay the ongoing costs now. This happens quite a lot, and this is also a problem. You can't really just say that this is a budgetary problem, but it is a factual problem for these farms. And basically it must be solved, because otherwise, as far as livestock protection is concerned, we will not make any progress. And an example from Baden-Württemberg, where we have many service providers who install fences. If you ask for an offer, now we have wolves in the Black Forest, for example, and if you want to build a fence on Schwäbisch Alb, then you don't get an offer for less than 25 or even more euros per running meter. So the prices have increased exponentially. They have increased by 100%, and one of the reasons is the high demand. Okay, now we have a comment or a question in Italian. Perhaps our interpreter can help us if he or she sees the question.
Erst die Frage finden, gell?
It's about finding the question first.
Also im Chat. Okay, dann
well, it's in the chat.
Dann hat Herr Renner noch eine Frage zur
And Mr. Renner has a question which is about fencing and jumping options. How do we avoid jumping large carnivores? How do we achieve in the alpine countries that keepers are kind of aware of the risk of jumping over fences? Yes, we looked at the best practice examples. Basically, livestock protection advice is very important. If there are changes of the fence protection and if there's also a fund or a subsidy, then this process should be used in order to do the important communications, so that you have people with experience that help others. So this is something that we distilled out of these interviews. When you actually route the fence wrong, then this is a mistake that you can't eliminate later. So this is very important. And it also helps you to maintain the fences economically, and also you make them safer. There are sometimes simple things. For dykes, we often have just benches in front of the fences. This is imminent to the system. You don't really actually find it strange, but this looks trivial, but in practice, in real life, it isn't actually.
Frage oder der Vorschlag aus Italien ist noch,
Yes, and the suggestion from Italy
Zäune
is
eben da aufzustellen, wo es
that the fences should
um
be
quasi Ressourcen zu
put up
sparen, um sich auf die Orte zu konzentrieren, wo
in
jedes
places
Jahr nomadisch geweidet wird.
where there's
Also sprich
nomadic
nur an sehr schwierigen Stellen zu zäunen,
grazing
wenn
all
ich
the
das
time.
richtig
So,
verstehe,
if I understand this correctly, to limit
damit es
fences
auf
to
diese
critical
Arbeit spart
places.
und der Rest dann wahrscheinlich quasi als Hirte dann
Ja.
quasi übersichtlich behirten kann.
Also das
And
ist tatsächlich
so
das
that the
Konzept, das
rest
wir auch
can
draußen
be
angetroffen haben. Das ist natürlich von
tended
Betrieb
by
zu
shepherds
Betrieb
well.
unterschiedlich. Das
Well,
kann
this
nicht jeder
depends
machen,
from
aber das ist
one
eine sehr, sehr
farm to
effiziente
the other.
und
Not
ganz
everybody can do that, but this is a
Möglichkeit, mit den
cost-efficient
Herdenschützen umzugehen. Also
possibility
wir haben
of
das also
dealing with
auch
livestock
zu Hause
protection.
genauso
We
wahrgenommen.
actually
Ein Teil
saw
der
that
Betriebe machen
outside
das,
as well. Some farms
indem man sich
actually do
nächtliche
it.
Safe Sites schafft,
They
nennen wir das jetzt mal
do
so, in Form von
nightly safe
Nachtkoppeln oder
sites.
Nachtpferchen,
They do
die
night paddocks
meistens auf
or
irgendeiner
night
Lage mit
pens,
relativ geringem Aufwand sehr sicher
usually
zäunen
on
kann
a
und dann
flat
die
ground,
Flächen
which I can
eigentlich
enclose with
exorbitant
the fence
höhere
very
Kosten haben, um
effectively.
die dann nachher sicher
So
auch zu zahlen und
that
dann
I
einfach
don't
in der
have
Behirtung zu lassen. Ich nenne Ihnen
to
auch noch mal ein
enclose
Beispiel
areas
direkt von den
that are more
alten
difficult
Situationen.
to enclose with
Von
fence
Deich, wir
and
haben einen
that I
Betrieb,
can
das Sven Keller
send shepherds
quasi
to.
interviewt hat.
I mean,
Der
Keller made
bewirtet
an interview
250 Hektar
with a farmer and he
Deichfläche
has
weltweit. Ganz schmale,
250
langgezogene Deiche. Das ist in
hectares
Umlandbewirtung
of
eigentlich gar nicht
Elbe
sinnvoll,
dike.
sowas zu zäunen. Wäre so oder
It
so nicht
doesn't
sinnvoll.
make
Und
sense to
die haben
put a
ein
fence
sehr, sehr
around it. You
sicheres
have
System
to
in einem Gebiet, wo resident
absolutely use
Wolfsrudel sind,
shepherds,
haben keine Übergriffe
and
ergeben, die eben nächtliche
they have
Pferche
dogs
schaffen, die sehr
there
sicher
and
sind
they
und
don't
tagsüber
have
bei den
tax
Tieren sind.
because
Machen das
they
mit
put the
Arbeitskräften
animals in the
sehr, sehr
night into
effizient.
the pen.
Und auch
They
im
do it
Übrigen im
quite
Vergleich, was für horrende
well
Anschaffungskosten für sichere Zäune
and
haben, auch tatsächlich volkswirtschaftlich
compared
sinnvoll.
to the
Ja,
horrendous
das heißt,
costs that
da eine
constructing a fence
Sicherung
here
aufzustellen, tatsächlich
would involve.
also
It is
Hirten
very
als
economical. So here,
Arbeitskräfte in den Herdenschutz zu integrieren, ist vollkommen
shepherds and
nachvollziehbar.
herders,
Also nicht
to
nur
integrate
fachlich,
them
sondern
into livestock
ich kann es
protection
zum Teil auch nicht ganz
absolutely makes
nachvollziehen, warum
sense.
man dann immer sagt,
I
das kann man jetzt
can't
nicht leisten.
understand why
Dafür
sometimes people
sagt
say
man,
that
das
we
lohnt sich nicht,
cannot
aber letztendlich
actually afford that, and then they go over the roof with the
Gut,
expenses for the
dann Herr Röhl,
materials.
nochmal recht herzlichen Dank für die Beantwortung der Fragen.
All right,
Und
Mr.
ja,
Röhl, thank you so much for
Dankeschön, dass Sie
answering the
da waren.
questions and thank you for being here.